Just last month, we made over $6,700 on a short-term rental property that would have only rented for about $1,800 as a long-term rental. Why would anybody do long-term rentals? Hi, my name is Michael. I'm one of the co-founders of STR Wealth Academy, and my wife and I, we control a portfolio of nearly 70 units that have generated over $13 million for us in the last 6 years that we've been in this industry. Now, in today's video, what I'd like to do is I want to go over some key reasons why my wife and I decided to go with short-term rentals to build our financial freedom that we enjoy today versus going with long-term rentals and just other forms of real estate that are there. Before we get into all that, I want to tell you a quick story. About 5 years ago now, my wife and I, we knew we wanted to do something different. We knew we wanted to get out of the rat race. We wanted to not be clinging to 9-to-5 jobs that we both had at the time. Back then, I used to work in finance. I was a currency trader, worked in finance, talked to a lot of really smart people, and everyone had always talked about you got to be involved in real estate. You got to get into rental properties. And at the time, I thought that was the way that you did it in order to achieve financial freedom. At that time, I was living in a duplex. My wife and I, when we got a little bit more serious, I ended up moving into her place. And then what we ended up doing was we took that property that I lived in and turned it into a long-term rental. I signed a lease with, at the time, seemed like a very nice lady and her family. And everything seemed to be fine. You know, the rental checks were coming in. There wasn't too many headaches, at least at that time there wasn't. But then we'd rent this property for about 2 years, and we'll show you some videos in just a moment here, but the condition I got my property back in was a little bit shocking, to say the least. It was pretty much fucked, if I'm being totally honest. You'll see some photos of that just on the screen here. They just completely trashed the place. Wasn't a very good experience. At this time though, while all of this was happening, my wife and I were slowly building up a short-term rental property portfolio on the side, using it with properties we actually did not own. Now, we talk about this on the channel all the time about how you can acquire properties without having to own them. But finally, when it came to the point where this property came up on lease, we just knew that we wanted to do something different, so we decided to turn this property into a short-term rental. Now, obviously, it had to go through a lot of renovations and it had to go through a lot of rehab to get it back to rentable condition. But what I want to do next is I want to take you and show you what the house looks like now, and just take you through some of the numbers of what we were able to see literally last month. And then I'll just talk to you about why we have gone with short-term rentals as opposed to building a portfolio of long-term rentals. So let's dive into it. What I have in front of me here, this is the actual listing after we turned it into a short-term rental. This is what we coined our Nordic spa retreat. We put a lot of work into the backyard. We created a fire pit. We have a hot tub back there. We put a lot of work into this property. Just to give you an idea of some of the aesthetics and things that we added in, we had it professionally designed. We had professional photos done. We did a lot of work in the basement. You could probably see in some of the photos previously. Obviously, the basement got the worst of it. But we had to put about $30,000 into this property to do some of the rehab and then also with the furnishings as well. So what I want to take you guys through next is just some of the numbers that we saw, and then I want to talk to you about why we do short-term rentals as opposed to long-term rentals. What I have in front of me here, this is the financial statement from literally this month. As of the time I'm recording, this is late October 2024. This is live, real-time performance from the particular unit. As I mentioned at the start of this video, we had done over $6,700 in revenue on this property. That's broken down by booking revenue and cleaning fee. Now, when you book on Airbnb, you have service fees to pay, so that's 3% they take from the host. You can see that taken out there. Here's some of my cleaning costs I had on this property. Now, this property, because I own it, I actually lease the property back to myself, so I generate rental income for me personally, and that's how I pay the mortgage and other expenses, so that's what that is showing there. Had some repairs and maintenance come up. You know, we had to send people to take care of the hot tub. There was just a few little service calls here and there, not too much. This is what it costs to get the garbage taken on a weekly basis. We pay 30 bucks a week. Insurance, internet, utilities. So on a net basis, this property generated almost $2,500 in cash flow in one of the slowest periods of the year in this market. So previously, when I had this as a long-term rental, I was getting around $1,800 a month. It was barely covering the mortgage and other expenses, really not that much in the way of cash flow. So I think you can see pretty quickly why we pivoted to doing short-term rentals as opposed to keeping it as a long-term rental. Okay, so now that you saw some of the numbers in terms of what we were able to do on the exact same property, having it as a short-term rental as opposed to a long-term rental, why did we decide to go with short-term rental? Probably the biggest reason that my wife and I went this direction was, number one, flexibility and control. Well, one of the major reasons, as you just saw it, is if it's run properly, you can generate significantly higher amounts of rental income by running a property as a short-term rental as opposed to doing it as a long-term rental. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into it. You have to have a good listing, you have to have a good product, you have to have good photos, amenities, all the stuff that we talk about in STR Wealth Academy. But if you do it right and you have a very clear focus and strategy, you can do substantially better than what you can do as a long-term rental. The other thing with it as well is because we have guests coming in and out of the property frequently, the second reason why we really decided to go with short-term rentals as opposed to long-term rentals is there's a lot more upkeep and maintenance that happens on a short-term rental as opposed to a long-term rental. Now, what I mean by this specifically is that because you have people coming through the property regularly, you get notified of little issues that come up and you can take care of them quickly before they turn into much bigger problems. When I had my property as a long-term rental, I didn't hear anything from the tenant. Now, there was the odd time where I would go by the property and I would check it out and it was never really in like that bad a condition. It could have been a little bit cleaner, but by the time she had moved out, a lot of these small issues that could have been taken care of very quickly just turned into massive, massive issues that led to very expensive renovations. I had to repaint, there was holes in walls. It was just a freaking disaster. The other thing too is that because you can get on top of maintenance issues a lot quicker, again, it just helps control your costs so that way small issues don't turn into big problems. The other thing with it is that the property gets cleaned far more frequently too. Sometimes we have guests only stay a night, sometimes they stay multiple nights, sometimes multiple weeks, but because we have the cleaning crew through the property so often, the property just stays in much better condition over the long term, which if the property stays in better condition, then it's going to keep the value higher over the longer term versus you having to go back and completely rehab like I did after my long-term tenant moved out. Now, the third major reason why we decided to go with short-term rentals as opposed to long-term rentals is just market demand and trends. The biggest thing is that people are not going to stop vacationing. People are not going to stop taking business trips. People are not going to stop going to see families during special occasions and events. The genie is already out of the bottle when it comes to short-term rentals. And this industry is only set to grow. Despite what you hear about oversaturation and too much competition and all the stuff that you hear in other YouTube channels, this industry is not going away. By the year 2030, the short-term rental industry is set to double in size. Right now, it's about a $125 billion a year industry. By 2030, they're predicting it'll be about $250 billion a year industry. So $250 billion a year. So you've definitely not missed the boat in terms of the opportunity that exists within the short-term rental space. That's why we're so excited about it, and that's why we're continuing to grow, we're continuing to expand, we're continuing to help people learn about how to take advantage of this opportunity so you don't miss the boat on it. The fourth major reason why we went into short-term rentals as opposed to long-term rentals is risk management. As I showed earlier on this video, one of the biggest hassles with long-term rentals is really having to deal with tenants. Obviously, there's hassles that come along with having to deal with guests, and believe me, we've had our doozies of guests that have caused issues at properties, but the major reason is that when you have a tenant that's not a great tenant, again, like I mentioned earlier, a small issue can turn into a major problem, especially if you don't get to see the property and its condition on a more frequent basis. The other thing that's really cool about managing risk with short-term rentals is that if you price your property well and you maintain a high enough occupancy, you can pay your fixed expenses on your property with a lot less reservations than what you might be able to get over an entire month's worth of rental income as a long-term rental. So said a different way, if I was to only book out the weekends on this particular property, I could literally cover all of my fixed expenses, and then any revenue I get during the week, that could basically become all profit to me on the bottom line after I run my financials at the end of the month. And those are some of the major reasons why we decided to go with short-term rentals as opposed to long-term rentals. But the fifth and final reason that I want to share on this video, although in this example, I showed you a case study of a property that we personally own, the bulk of what Katrina and I do at STR Wealth Academy is showing you how to build a portfolio of short-term rental properties without actually having to own any real estate or assume ownership over an asset. The bulk of what we have done has actually come from controlling other people's properties. And if you're just getting started, you really don't need a huge amount of down payment. You don't need great credit. You can literally get started by controlling other people's properties, which is how we began our journey before we started to eventually acquire properties ourselves we ultimately own. Those are just a few of the reasons why we love the short-term rental space. Now, if you ever thought about getting started, we're here to help. We were just like you. We were ready to escape the 9-to-5. And we actually managed a few properties while we were still working our 9-to-5 jobs till we could fully transition and support ourselves in leaving. Now, if you're looking to get started, go ahead and check out the description below, and you can check out some of the different other trainings we have available on how to get this business going and showing you exactly step by step how this works, how to find properties, how to build a portfolio, how to get your team set up, and ultimately turn this into a real business that can give you time, location, and ultimately financial freedom. If you enjoyed the training today, go ahead and check out the links in the description below. And as always, leave us a comment, let us know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this training and found it helpful. We'll see you on the next video. Take care.